Now, is the stellar run for bank shares coming to a close, with the regulator demanding that the big banks hold extra reserves and use more conservative risk weightings to their mortgage books? Something will have to give. Roger Montgomery from Montgomery Asset Management joins me now in the studio. And Roger, look, something like this has been coming for some time. Now,
Yes.
how will the big banks, including Macquarie Bank, find this extra capital, and who's going to pay for it?
Well, in the case of Westpac, for example, they've sold BT. They sold a stake in BT, so they're preparing for it. You might remember we discussed here on the program the capital raising of the National Australia Bank. So they're well placed. The Commonwealth Bank will come out and make some comments about what they're going to do. The reality is, though, that where previously $100 of mortgages required $1.62 of equity capital, they now require more than $2, perhaps $2.40. So they need more capital. However they get it, their return on equity is going to come down. And when the return on equity drops, so does the valuation of the company. And in the long run, price follows value. So while the banks will be infinitely larger in 20 or 30 years' time, there's always going to be stumbling blocks along the way, and this might be one of them.
OK, well, going back to who's going to pay for this, you're implying that actually perhaps dividends will be under threat. Now, this is obviously something which has been majorly important for the banks,
Yes.
attracting shareholders. Do you think the great yield story could be threatened?
I think that's the last thing on the list of options for the banks.
Yes.
There'll be cost outs first. There'll be cuts to the interest rates being paid to depositors. There'll be increases to mortgage rates. That'll happen first.
Well, I noticed that
dividends.
people around, some of my colleagues around here saying, one of them was saying to me, oh, well, my 10% deposit has now changed. I can't actually have just a 10% deposit for a property anymore.
No, and in fact, well, there's macro-prudential rules around with respect to the property market as well.
Yeah.
But I think now is probably the time to take out a mortgage if you were going to borrow any money long term and fix your rates.
Yes.
Now might be the time to do that.
But don't you think this is all part of the same thing, pulling back and mortgages going up in terms of how this is going
absolutely.
to impact? Yeah.
It's going to impact depositors. It will impact borrowers. It will impact shareholders.
Yes, and so you still think, from the point of view, the shareholders are the one thing that the banks put ahead of their customers almost in this situation.
If you're on the board or you're in management at a bank and your long-term incentives and short-term incentives relate to share price performance by any magnitude, then the last thing you want to do is cut dividends.
Do you think all of this could affect house prices?
I think house prices are already being affected. I think we've seen house prices top out, and if interest rates go up, even in the absence of the Reserve Bank of Australia lifting rates, if we see banks not being so generous in terms of the discretion that they have in the mortgages that they offer customers, we're going to find that that's going to, I think, cap the upside for property in Australia.
So overall, how do you think this is going to put the competitors to the big banks, the smaller banks, the building societies?
And I'll let me tell you right up front, we're owners of Bendigo Bank because we believe that they'll be competitively advantaged. Previously, they needed more than $3 of equity for every $100 that they wrote in mortgages compared to the bank's $1.62. Yeah. That playing field is more level. It's not quite level, but it's certainly not as steep as it was once before. And that was David Murray's recommendation, and that's one of the observations that he made in the FSI report, and that's exactly what we're going to see. So Bendigo Bank will be relatively more competitive than it once was, and so will the other regional banks.
See how long it takes to track through to results. Roger Montgomery, thank you very much.
It's a pleasure, Ticky.